You were writing about Marcus Rashford. Everyone's talking about Marcus Rashford, it seems, currently, and not just in terms of what he's been doing on the pitch, but what he's been doing off the pitch. And at the weekend, there were some supporters who were saying to Rashford, you need to concentrate in terms of what you're doing on the pitch. A remarkable performance from him off the bench last night against RB Leipzig at Old Trafford. And you said he deserves to be in the conversation with the likes of Erling Haaland and Kylian Mbappe. And based on what we've seen from Rashford so far this season, it would seem he's right up there.
Yeah, I mean, the point I was trying to make, though, is that over the last since he got into the United team in, 2016, he spent most of his time in the Europa League, or certainly half his time. I think he's played 20 Europa League games and 20 Champions League games now. And unlike Mbappe and Haaland, who basically gone straight into the Champions League and hit it, fantastically, Rashford's had to put up with being in the Europa League, so he's not had the chance to claim that stage as his own, and he's older than Haaland and Mbappe, obviously, but I think he's certainly got the skill set to be in that conversation. I'm not saying he's better than Azram or he's worse, whatever, but I think he's part of that new wave of attacking talent that when Ronaldo and Messi vacate the stage, there'll be new big stars, and I think he is in that bracket. I think he's got something about him. He's got pace. He has a trick. He could score more goals, but maybe that's going to come into his game now, as we saw last night.
That clinical side appears to be just the edge that's needed. That might come from him playing more centrally. John Giles, we were talking to him earlier on the programme, he thinks that transition might be more permanent now from the left-hand side over to centre forward. Now, himself and Martial and Greenwood can move around within that front three, but there will probably come a point when Rashford becomes United's number 9.
Yeah, and I think having Edinson Cavani around will help him as well, even if it's for just the rest of the season. I think one thing that Jose Mourinho identified, way back, I think 2016, was that Martial and Rashford had a good future, but they weren't experienced enough to kind of shoulder the burden and be relied upon to score the goals. So Jose brought in Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who had a great season, but then he got injured. And I think even still now, I think Rashford is 23 at the weekend. He's still young and he still needs that guiding hand. And I think Cavani at 33, 34, he's been around the block. He can help massively with Rashford on the training pitch, on the pitch as well. And I think you'll see the development there. But I think there's also a comparison to be made, turn the clock back to, I think, 2006, 2007, when United had Wayne Rooney and Cristiano Ronaldo both kind of knocking on the door. Same sort of thing, young players with a great future. And at that point, United were at the stage where they didn't know if they were ever going to catch Chelsea again and become the great power again. And they obviously did when Ronaldo and Rooney became big stars. And I think United now have that. They're on the cusp of that again with Rashford and maybe Mason Greenwood. But the club themselves have to do the right thing by those two and other young players by making sure they have the rest, the quality around them to take United to the next level. And I'm not quite sure they're there yet, whether they've got the right manager or the right players. But Rashford and Greenwood will be stars for the next 10 years. United have to do their best to keep them there.
Watching the game last night, something that kind of crossed my mind was United have looked a lot more composed in Europe this season. This was a very difficult group when it was drawn. Two teams who got to the last four of the Champions League. You would think that it was going to be a battle to get out of this group with PSG and RB Leipzig around. But United has put in two really good back-to-back performances in Europe, which has been in contrast with some of the patchy form they've shown so far in the Premier League.
It's really difficult to put your finger on that, because I was watching the game last night thinking the same thing, that they do seem to be more at ease in the Champions League, whether it's because the Champions League is a more tactical game and players have to be more concentrated throughout the game. There's certain United players who do switch off at times. I think in the Premier League, maybe they don't give the game the full attention that they should do, whether they think it's going to be easier, whether there's a sense of familiarity with their opponents that makes them switch off. But in the Champions League, they're on it. Even Pogba last night, I thought had a good game. He was focused and on it as well. And I just think being in the Champions League kind of adds to that sense of needing to be fully focused and fully concentrated, something they don't quite have in the Premier League. So it could just be a minor thing like that kind of little element of being on the toes because it's the Champions League and not the Premier League.
Donny van de Beek has played very little in the Premier League, less than an hour combined time so far. He had to watch from the sidelines at Old Trafford at the weekend with the scoreless draw against Chelsea. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has been fairly forceful in saying, look, this is a player I'm going to bet in, this is a player I'm going to use over time. How do you find this kind of fitting in period that he's going through at the moment? Because there's been lots of external noise, whether it's Marco van Basten and guys saying that, De Beek should be a first choice player for Manchester United. What have you made of this kind of transition into the squad that he's made so far?
Well, I was told that he wasn't a Solskjaer target in the summer, so that kind of explains why Solskjaer's been so reluctant to start him in games. If he wasn't one of these targets and he was a player that was signed by the club's scouts, obviously Solskjaer would have signed it off, but he wasn't one of the players that he had on his list at the start. So that makes you realise that there are maybe one or two doubts about Van der Beek's qualities. I mean, I've seen a bit of Van der Beek. I think he's a decent player. I think he will add something to United, but I guess Solskjaer has to find a way to accommodate him in a team that has Bruno Fernandes, Paul Pogba, Rashford, Martial. In the attacking areas, does he get in? There's a danger that he becomes another, Ander Herrera, a guy that, plugs the gaps here and there. But I do think he's better than that Van der Beek. And I do find it confusing that Solskjaer hasn't given him more game time, because he does offer something that neither Fernandes nor Pogba have. And I think that's that defensive discipline. I think he can complement playing with those players. But it's a strange one. They paid a lot of money for him, and obviously it was a deal that was done fairly quickly. So he suggests it had a lot of work in the pipeline. So it just suggests that Solskjaer's not yet convinced by his qualities.
They'll play a lot of games, so no doubt there's going to be rotation, but there's no real way to work Fernandes, Pogba and Van der Beek into the one team. Realistically, they're going to need Fred or Matic sitting behind them. Otherwise, United run the risk of being entirely overrun in midfield by decent teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Scott McTominay came on last night, and he looks like he's got promise. I think McTominay and Matic, if you could put the two players together, you'd have the perfect defensive midfielder, a guy with experience and nous, but his legs are going a bit in Matic. And McTominay, who's got all the legs in the world, all the energy, but does need to rein it in a little bit at times. But there's a balance to be struck there. Solskjaer played a diamond last night, but I do think that he's got options in midfield, and if he picks the right blend, there are good options. But I don't think he's found that blend yet, because it's difficult to accommodate all those players. Certainly you can't play Van der Beek, Fernandes and Pogba together. If you do, who plays in terms of Matic or McTominay or Fred? It's difficult, but at least United now have options. For too long in recent seasons, they've not had the good options good enough to have that dilemma. So they have a chance now to build a decent midfield with the players they've got.
Sticking with Manchester and the blue half of Manchester, I know you were writing about City's very indifferent start to the season in the Premier League. Pep Guardiola's never gone into a fifth season with a club before. At Barcelona, he bailed out after 4 seasons. He was gone at that point with Bayern Munich, and he had a sabbatical either side of that and then went into Man City. This is the longest run he's ever had as a manager. Is there that feeling that maybe it's starting to sour a bit for City going into this fifth season under Guardiola, bearing in mind that there's no certainty over his contract beyond this summer?
Yeah, there are a lot of question marks over Guardiola. I did a piece with a sports psychologist before the start of the season about Pep, because you're right, it's the first time he's going into a fifth season. It's the first time he's having to rebuild. He's having to, start again, which he's never done. He's never done anyway. He's basically built a great team or inherited a great team, and then when that team needs re-energising or rebuilding, he's moved on. He's got that task at City, and all of a sudden he's finding that they haven't replaced Vincent Kompany sufficiently. They haven't replaced David Silva. They haven't found a replacement long-term for Fernandinho, Sergio Aguero, the same problem. He's there getting injured all the time. So it does feel like City are now running out of that impetus, which they've had for a good 10 years, since Shakeman took over in 2008. So you do look at City and think that it does feel a bit tired right now. Pep Guardiola was brought there. He was always the guy they wanted. Fran Soriano and Chiqui Begiristain, the guys from Barcelona, came in with the job of getting Guardiola. They've got him, but what now? And if Guardiola goes, it'd be interesting to see what happens at City, whether the Catalan connection at the club stays or whether that moves on as well and they have to start again. So, yeah, it's a big year, and I'm not quite sure that Pep is committed to staying beyond the end of the season. But equally, I'm not sure that City are too exercise right now to tie him down to a longer-term contract.
It was a huge call. I mean, once you decide to bring in the likes of Soriano and Chiqui Begiristain, as you mentioned, they were basically trying to rebottle what Barcelona were able to do back in 2009. It was getting the old band back together again. But they are facing now, when you look at the age profile of their squad too, that Sergio Aguero is coming towards the end of his best form. He's going to have to be replaced at some point. David Silva is almost impossible to replace. Even if you've got players like Phil Foden and Gabriel Jesus coming through, City's purchasing at the back has been a constant problem. The players they bring in, they're having to spend more money on top of that to replace them. So instead of spending the big money maybe to replace the marquee talents at the front, City have had to spend a lot of the money at the back.
Like I said, in the piece I wrote, I made the point that they do seem to be making the same mistakes that Man United made under Fergie 10, 12 years ago, in terms of they've got some great servants there like Ferdinand and Vidic, but they replaced them with Smalling and Jones. And what I mean is that incrementally they're replacing great players with inferior players. And I think that's happened at City, and certainly at the back. There's a lot of players that have moved on that haven't been replaced, and they certainly haven't replaced Kompany. They spent an awful lot of money on centre-halves in recent years. They spent 100 million this summer on Nathan Ake and Ruben Dias, and time will tell if they're the solution. But the problem is that if you keep signing players that aren't as good as the ones they replace, the team will decline. And I think that's happened at City. And, you know, the best players that they signed for me were the players that they signed under Roberto Mancini. I think Brian Maury and Gary Cook were at the helm. It was the likes of Aguero, Yaya Toure, David Silva. You can even say James Milner. They haven't replaced these players properly over the years. And it's interesting now that City are at the stage where they spend a lot of money, but they always seem to spend it in that kind of tier B bracket. They don't sign £100 million players. They don't go right at the top end of the market. They stock the club up with, you know, £50, £60 million players, good players, but not the top high end players. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see if they can take it on and start again. But all of a sudden, they've got 4 or 5 players to sign rather than 2 or 3.
I wonder as well, Mark, on a final note, how much of their project this summer was based around a belief that Lionel Messi was going to walk away from Barcelona and that Man City were ready to welcome him along with open arms. I wonder how much of their planning for this year was actually based around what was happening around the Nou Camp.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because the people you speak to at City or spoke to at the time they were always kind of hedging the bet, saying, look, he'll stay at Barcelona. I think there's always a belief that, an acceptance that he would stay. But within that, there was a hope that he would go to City. And I think if Messi was definitely going to leave, City would have been in front of the queue, which kind of made me kind of smile the other day when Guardiola was talking about wanting a new striker, but they couldn't afford it. Well, you know, if they hadn't spent so much time trying to get Lionel Messi, who they couldn't afford either, then they might have got the striker they wanted. So you do wonder about the priorities. It seemed to me that they were trying to sign Messi as one kind of final gift for Pep, you know, to try and square the circle and get that Champions League, you know, trophy at the club, and Messi was the answer to it, and it didn't get Messi. So who knows, the next time we see Messi and Guardiola together, they could be back at Barcelona next year.
Yeah, interesting to see what happens this coming summer. Mark, thanks a million for joining us on Off the Ball.
No problems.